All right, everyone, the first subject of the day has got to be the Democratic Party, because going into midterm season, this sort of takes off from their money woes within the DNC. We've got to talk about another reason why the Democrats are having problems right now. Now, keep in mind, they are still supposedly 10 points ahead or so in a generic ballot. They've got who they cast off as the most unpopular president in recent history. That's not entirely true, but he's certainly below 45-50%, which is, maybe more a better place to be going into such a situation. And yet they've got technically three main problems. The DNC being broke is certainly one of them. I spoke about that yesterday. They basically have no money. The amount of debt that the DNC has is greater than the amount that they have on hand. That is a problem. Certainly the local offices, like the state offices, the Vermont DNC months ago had the same problem and said, well, we basically don't have money. People just aren't donating. There's no one who's going to be willing to free up to donate to us probably over the next, however many months. We're going to be going in dry. It's not going to be fun. So that's certainly one problem, although it's a side issue. Another problem that the Democratic Party has right now is simply, with regard to the midterms, the races that are actually up, a lot of them are pretty safe red. Like, it doesn't matter if they're ahead in a generic ballot, because you got to understand, when they talk about generic ballot polling, can I tell you something important, and they never tell you this on the media? That is a national poll. That's not on a statewide level. That would matter if all the races were otherwise presumed to be 50-50. You would say, well, the Democrats then win all the races. But they're not 50-50. In a lot of these places, the Republicans would be favored by 10 to 15 points anyway. So you might see some close ones. And I don't think it's enough to give them the House, certainly. That's basically off the table. In the Senate, it could be closer, but the thing is, I think the Democrats have to win more than 2-1 in order to accomplish that, again, with many of those races being in areas that heavily favor Republicans. But the really big problem, and this is much bigger, I think, in my estimation, especially going forward even in 2020. The biggest problem is the double backfire, which is that the Democratic Party has a schism problem. The Republicans already had theirs. They already schismed, basically. They jettisoned some, libertarian-leaning Republicans. They jettisoned some of the neocons. Ultimately, though, the party recoalesced under Trump's vague populism. And they're doing just fine right now. Money-wise, they're raking it in. Their approval is slowly on the mend now, I think, in the wake of Trump's tax policies. Now that people are seeing a bigger paycheck, they don't dislike Trump so much now, do they? It's the money president thing. With the Democrats, you get a problem. You have two fundamental warring groups within the Democratic Party, the neoliberals and everybody else, and that's becoming a problem. The problem is that the Democrats have traditionally waged wedge issue style campaigns. Now, this is really great for younger voters. It's really great for the further left. The problem is that they've gotten out wedge issued by third parties. They got out wedge issued by Trump in some cases. They shafted their actual progressive candidate, and so in the last election they suffered. People are still smarting from that. The natural inclination then for all of those younger voters, the further left, is to ignore the Democratic Party, stand on principle, and 2-1, they won't bother voting for them. They may vote Republican to punish them. They may vote third party. They certainly would be likely to stay home. Turnout is a huge thing within elections. On a state-to-state level, in an area where you need a considerably higher than normal turnout for the Democrat to have any chance of winning because the state leans red anyway, regardless of this generic ballot nonsense, what exactly is the Democratic Party going to do when it relies upon those further left or younger voters? Even on a statewide level, it will be difficult, I think, when they're getting outraised and outspent 40-1 potentially in the midterms to begin with. And the Republicans have this advantage when it comes to, elections that aren't, general elections. The Democrats way outraised the Republicans in the last election. The midterms looks like it's going to be totally lopsided the other way. And just think the Republicans swept them aside despite being outraised and outspent, and despite their candidate supposedly being Adolf Hitler. So just imagine what's going to happen in the midterms when it's on a state-to-state level, and you don't have, Trump can go selectively into areas where he's more popular than others, send others by proxy into areas where they're popular. It's a good thing for the Republicans looking at that map anyway. The Democratic Party has another problem, though. The double side of this is that the younger and further left individuals, that they need to use wedge issues to invigorate. They need to say, basically, we're the anti-Trump party. We're going to have a far-left tax platform. Socialism's pretty cool by us. We need racial and sex-based wedge issues, you know, the wage gap and white privilege and stuff. That's really great for maybe those younger voters and stuff. That, by the way, that helps them a lot in the Southwest, especially with regards to wanting to end sovereignty, to end the concept of the nation state and just be a globalist sort of empire. When they say this sort of thing, it helps them with immigrant communities. Certain communities, certainly Nevada, it helps them there. Helps them in Arizona, they could turn it blue. New Mexico, they're not going to have to be challenged at Colorado increasingly. Even parts of Texas, which is what people are worried about. But I'm telling you, the GOPers, don't worry about Texas turning blue, because in the off chance it does, it'll be at the expense of the rest of the Rust Belt turning red. Is that Minnesota will turn red. Michigan will no longer be in play. Illinois, you could see, because of differential turnout, you could see if the outlying areas of Chicago get their recovery, properly speaking, state could turn red. It doesn't matter if it's far blue right now. Texas was far red an election ago. Now it's, you know, a little bit closer. You could see a 10, 15-point swing in a single election. Absolutely you could. Depends on the demographics involved and differential turnout. The problem is that by using the wedge issues that are good for the far left and the young, they alienate the blue-collar, the working and middle-class Rust Belt Democrats who already have heavily flipped in favor of Trump. Many of them voted for him. That gave him Pennsylvania, it gave him Michigan, it gave him a solid lead. Indiana and Ohio were basically out of the running. Wisconsin, it was closer than it would be otherwise in Minnesota, even in Illinois. Outside of higher turnout in the Chicago area, of course, in those other areas, you get a good counterbalance to things. Trump did very well up there because he's a money figure. It's going to be hard for the Dems, by the way, to even, challenge that anyway. That's another problem that they've got, is Trump is the Don. He is the Don of the dollar. So it's going to be hard for them to make that argument going forward to any community that gets better over the next few years. As opposed to how well it recovered under Obama. All those communities are going to tilt heavily towards Trump. There's your small towns that were like swing state area. You get a small town, you get sort of a more even mix. It might lean slightly red. Now up there, it leans heavily red. You saw a massive movement. The only part of the country that began to lean more blue was the Southwest. That's because of immigration as a wedge issue and leftist tax policies. That's really great for making sure you don't have to campaign too much in the state of Nevada and that you get a shot at stealing maybe Arizona. But it loses you so many electoral points up in the Great Lakes region, it's not even worth it. But, here's the but. As we saw with Clinton being a neoliberal, if they swing back and get a blue-collar candidate who says, oh yeah, unions are great, racial wedge issue is kind of off the table for me. It'll be a white male candidate if this happens, like a Biden or something. If they go up into the Great Lakes, into the Rust Belt, and they start campaigning on, hey, we've seen the light, we're sorry that you've been hurting, we want to help your communities too, and here's how we'll do it. They may be able to grab back parts of the Rust Belt, but then they'll lag behind in the Southwest. They might end up alienating. They suffered, despite Trump being supposedly a total xenophobe, he actually managed to increase the Republican share of virtually every minority voting bloc over like Romney and McCain. It was pretty good. What happens if that moves 3 or 4 more points? Is the Republicans keep Florida? They might grab Virginia back. They wouldn't have to worry about Arizona. It would still be off the table. Nevada would be back in play. You could even see the Pacific Northwest come into play. So which do the Democrats do? The problem is, because of the type of schismatic tendency they have, because of the 2 specific groups that feel alienated by them, they can't have both. They have to choose one or the other. That means that they have to pander to one, and they have to look for ways to get other people aboard. They would have to go more libertarian, or even further left to reabsorb the Green Party voters. Or they can go even further union, or they can use more wedge issues, or they can abandon them altogether. Now, the Republicans, very wisely, a few wedge issues that were holding them back, that were preventing a successful coalition in past elections, they've given up. Gay marriage was holding them back. They gave it up as a national platform. The only time you're going to hear it mentioned in the midterms is in a handful of safely red areas where some candidate is drumming up evangelical support. on a national platform, it no longer has significant relevance. It's no longer important. The drug war, Trump has backed off of it. One of the big problems he's having right now is Sessions keeps saying stupid shit about marijuana, despite the fact that now even red states like Alaska are legalizing it. The gig is up. The DEA at some point is going to have to back totally off and stop talking about it like it's the devil's weed. The sooner, by the way, the Republican Party does that, the better. That will help them with their youth vote gap, which they've been closing because Trump ran a Twitter campaign, basically. Because Trump is seen as anti-PC, ingratiates himself more to the youngest millennials, Gen Z. That's great. That's your up-and-coming youth voting bloc. By the way, those people entering the voting force over the next couple of years are much further right than the millennials were for being young. And groups tend to get more conservative as they get older anyway. So you got a big problem there also. You've got that massive number of Gen Xers that are starting to become more conservative as well. It's going to be difficult for the Democrats. The racial demographics aren't going to matter. Trust me, at some point, a lot of that's going to flip over as well, favoring right-wing politics, you could call them. It won't be the same right wing, though. Maybe it'll actually be real fiscal conservatism. People realize socialism doesn't work. They get tired of that shit. They're like, well, I'm 50 and the Obama economy took away my former cushy job and I'm flipping burgers. Maybe we should try something different other than just giving people peanuts. Especially when the left, their answer is, oh, well, we'll raise the minimum wage. That'll help everything. And then, of course, you do that and it fucks up the economy. It's not going to work. So you have a double problem. The Democrats are in a real bind going into the midterms. Now, what I've said consistently is if they underperform in the midterms, stress on the party will be great enough for the Pelosi's and the Warrens and all these freaks and weirdos, the neoliberals, to completely collapse away. They're already on the ropes. They already screwed up the last election. They made a big mistake with what they did to Bernie Sanders. He would have lost anyway. They shouldn't have very visibly cheated him out of a fair shot at losing on his own accord. He would have done a little bit better. It would have taken Clinton a little bit longer, but would it have mattered in the long run? No. They made a mistake. They also hedged their bets with, hey, we'll outraise and outspend Trump 10-1. That'll help us. That'll help us make the case that, that we're the party of the little people. It's going to be such a great time. The Democrats will continue that losing streak into the midterms, potentially. If they do, there's actually more hope in 2020 because you might get a reform candidate. Now, it may not be a real reformist. If they pull Joe Kennedy out of their asshole, that's just another neoliberal who happens to be younger and maybe a little bit more tech literate and more hip to the marijuana issue. That helps with the youth vote, but again, does that necessarily help them in that same important Rust Belt? No. Gillibrand, I think, would honestly be a better choice than Joe Kennedy, oddly enough. And she's totally inauthentic. People have been talking about Tulsi Gabbard. I don't see her being able to become a candidate anytime soon. I just don't think it's going to happen with the demographics the way they are. I could be wrong. Joe Biden won't be the candidate. Oprah won't be the candidate. Kamala Harris won't be the candidate. Those three definitely will not be the candidate. I can tell you that it's impossible to tell who will be. Those three won't be. There are other names that won't be on the list. Hillary Clinton will not be the candidate. It's not going to happen. Can you imagine the uproar among the Democratic lay people if someone who failed fucking twice and managed to bungle the last time around tried to run again? No, it would cause the collapse of the Democratic Party. In fact, it might be a good idea if Hillary Clinton wanted to do her own party a solid and save it, she would make a considerable run and she would stick it out until the end and make life as difficult as possible for the other candidates and try to actually schism the party. Because by doing that, they lose in the midterms. They get under, they lose in 2020. They then fall under so much social alienation, the youth and the far left rise up on one hand, the business Democrats on the other. The business Democrats probably end up winning out because of the fiscal situation being as it is, generally speaking. They reform the party into something it would have been maybe in the JFK days, and then the further left, the anarcho left, or whatever you would call it, they end up becoming Greens, but the Democratic Party all of a sudden becomes more palatable to the populace. It can reabsorb actually people that right now are part of the Republican coalition. See, there's a strange tendency. People act like if you lose a member of your coalition, it is inevitably bad. But it's not inevitably bad. It can be good. It can make your party more palatable to groups that would naturally support it anyway. You could conglomerate a bigger coalition, but you've alienated them by whining and dining some other group that they find totally objectionable. I think that the social justice warriors hold the Democratic Party back greatly, severely among business Democrats, libertarian-leaning individuals who, they're just like bleeding hard or something. Even people on the far left fiscally who don't take up the wedge issues, they're more sane than their social justice counterparts. Some, ultimately maybe 1 million or 2 million pink-haired, social justice warriors have thus caused the Democratic Party to avoid being able to get some 10 million actual votes from other people who will avoid the party like the plague so long as they wine and dine freaks and weirdos. So going into the midterms, I maintain that the Democrats are at a significant disadvantage. Now, they could pull it out of their ass. The problem is, if they do, they probably then get fucked in 2020 because there's no reason for them to reform their party. They'll get another boring neoliberal who will run a very standardized 90s campaign. Obviously, it will not succeed. Trump will run roughshod over them, probably expand his lead some, and he'll do fine because the economy will probably still be doing fine largely. That's about